Good evening and welcome to Edgemont High School's annual Financing College presentation. We're glad you're here. My name is Emily Coleman and I am a member of the high school counseling team. I'm joined by my colleagues tonight, Jamie Brookman, Liz Fisher, and Stephanie Fuentes. And we are also privileged to have Kyle Hosier, our principal, with us tonight as well. Tonight, we are thrilled to be joined by an extremely knowledgeable Caitlin Bias, the Associate Director of Financial Aid at Dickinson College. In this role, she works closely with prospective and continuing undergraduate students, providing guidance on all aspects of state, federal, and institutional financial aid, the process, and aid eligibility. As a 2010 graduate of Dickinson College, she earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and Secondary Education. She brings over 5 years of experience in financial aid, along with more than a decade's worth of work in student loan servicing at the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. As a dedicated financial aid professional, Caitlin is passionate about helping students and families navigate the complexities of college financing and better understand the many pathways to college affordability. And we are very honored to have her with us tonight. So before I hand the floor over to Ms. Bias, I just want to let you know that if you have any questions during the presentation, we encourage you to ask using the Google form on the Financing College website that you entered to access this workshop, excuse me. We will keep the Ask a Question form open until around 7:40, and the form will be monitored for any questions that come up. We ask that your questions remain general so that they can be beneficial for all participants. And if there's time at the end of the presentation, we will share your questions with Ms. Bias. But first, we have the lovely Meredith Cohen with us tonight to share a little information about the Edgemont Scholarship Fund. So Meredith, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. For those who don't know me, as Ms. Coleman had said, my name is Meredith Cohen, and I'm here representing the Edgemont Scholarship Council. First off, congratulations on this exciting time as you begin navigating the college process, which can be exciting and stressful all at the same time. So I wanted to let everyone know that we are here and we support and give need-based grants to college seniors, or sorry, high school seniors, Edgemont high school seniors, and current Edgemont grads who are in college. We have a new online application, which you can check out in preparation for next year when you're going through this process. In the spring, we always update our application, which is now fully online, and we give our grants by the end of June of senior year. So you can check that out online. If you don't need our support, you can also check us out at edgemontscholarshipcouncil.com to make a donation if you feel so inclined. The Scholarship Council is strictly, we give grants from those in the community who can help us sustain this. So check us out. If you have any questions, you can email us at edgemontscholarshipcouncil@gmail.com. And thank you for your time. Have a good night and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Meredith. Thanks for coming on tonight and talking.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So without further ado, I am going to hand the mic over to Miss Bias.
Thank you, Emily. I will share my screen now. Okay, are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
We're all good.
Always good to check. Thanks much. Let me just readjust my screen a little bit. There we go. Okay, so again, thank you so much for this warm welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you all for the next less than hour we have together. I really appreciate this time. I know financial aid can be very heavy and jargon heavy, but I appreciate your time. And let's face it, college can be very expensive. It's a very expensive investment into your child's future, and arguably one of the most important decisions for your child and your family moving forward. And it's about two of the most important things in your life, which is your child and your hard-earned income. So my goal this evening is that you walk away with a better understanding of financial aid and some helpful tips for the next steps of applying for financial aid. So to begin, let's define what financial aid is. Simply put, financial aid is funds or any funds to pay for post-secondary education costs that are not coming from you, the student, and or your family's funds. Instead, they're hopefully coming from grants, scholarships, loans, and or student employment. There are different types of financial aid. These are generally the 4 pillars of financial aid. They consist of scholarships, grants, loans, and work study and or what's called student employment. We'll dive deeper into the specifics about each of these financial aid fund types later on in the presentation. And you also might see a few different financial aid types other than the 4 that are listed here, depending on your family's circumstances. For instance, maybe you have a parent that's in military services and they're eligible for VA benefits. So you might see VA benefits be a part of your financial aid package. Or maybe you have a parent that works for an employer that offers tuition benefits, and maybe they're offered tuition assistance. So that's another component or type of financial aid that you might see on your financial aid package. So where does financial aid come from? A multitude of different sources. We have the federal government, which is typically through the completion of the FAFSA application, which might entail receiving the federal Pell Grant or another grant called Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. You are eligible, or all undergraduate students are eligible for the federal direct loan program through the completion of the FAFSA, and or you may be eligible for federal work study. Another source of financial aid may come from the state in which you reside or the state in which you plan on attending college. I know New York State has a lot of state grant opportunities, such as TAP and Excelsior. I'm not from New York, so I can't speak at length about the New York State grant programs. However, I would encourage you to go out to the HESC New York State website and research a little bit more about that. Just keep in mind for state financial aid, there might be stringent financial aid application deadlines. For instance, I know in the state of Pennsylvania, where I'm from and where I work for Dickinson College, the institution, our PA state grant program, they're very strict on the FAFSA application being in by May 1st. So just be mindful of deadlines. Another source of financial aid may come from institutional financial aid. So that would be from the college or university you plan on attending. Every institution is different. They would have non-need-based aid and need-based aid. It all varies depending on that institution. There's also other private sources, such as third-party or outside organizations, such as Google or Pepsi. Private sources are really a wild card. The sky is your limit. I would encourage you to seek out private sources or outside scholarships. Just be mindful, there are scams out there. There are institutions or organizations that may require a fee in order to get the scholarship. I would say stay far away from from those types of organizations. There's also Key Club, Lion Club, or Lions Club, YMCA, different civic organizations, or maybe you belong to a church that would offer financial aid. And lastly, what we talked about before, employers. Maybe if you're lucky, your parent works for an employer that plans on offering some type of tuition benefit. So the first pillar of financial aid is something called scholarships. These do not need to be paid back. They are considered gift aid. Sometimes scholarship and or award can be used on a financial aid offer letter, so they might be used interchangeably. They're not typically based off of financial need. They are determined differently and used differently at each institution. So you might have merit-based scholarship, you might have a FAFSA scholarship, or maybe an athletic scholarship. Also, like we talked about in the last slide, outside scholarships are worth pursuing. Typically, I have families that will ask me, well, how much outside scholarship funding can I receive before it impacts my financial aid offer? And our favorite saying in financial aid is, it always depends. But typically you can receive outside scholarships up to your calculated expected family contribution or student aid index without it impacting other scholarships or need-based aid. However, it is dependent upon each institution, so it's best to check with them. But I always say, shoot for the stars, apply to as many outside opportunities that there are, because it's worth pursuing and exhausting all avenues. Also, scholarships are typically based off of academics, academic rigor, community involvement, and leadership experience. The next type of financial aid would be grants. So typically 90% of the time, these are based off of financial need. However, there are some schools that use different grants as incentives to attend that institution or apply to that institution. For instance, FAFSA completion is very important, not only to high schools, but also to higher ed institutions. So, and they want you to complete the FAFSA to see what your financial aid need may be. So they may offer you as the student $1,000 FAFSA completion grant, or you might see it as a FAFSA completion award. Again, gift aid, they do not need to be repaid. Grants will require the completion of the FAFSA to determine eligibility, typically, since it's based off of need. And some colleges may require a different or additional applications. It's important to keep in mind, though, that grants can fluctuate since they're based off of financial need. It's important to keep in mind that might fluctuate in the years ahead. So when you're not only planning for 26, 27, because you have you have a graduating senior that's incoming for 26, 27, it's important to keep in mind what that grant may look like in the first year, but also in the 4 years ahead. And before I get into student loans, I think it's very important to bring up a new regulation that is impacting us here in financial aid. Some of you may be aware of it, depending on if you have other children that are currently enrolled, or maybe you yourself are enrolled in higher ed at this time. But there was an act and or bill, new regulation passed last year on July 4th, 2025. That's going to be effective starting this July 1st, called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBA for short. And it's impacting essentially loan caps and repayment terms coming in the future, and or future plans if you yourself are a graduate student, maybe you're a parent currently attending grad school, or your student knows for sure that they are going to attend undergraduate and graduate school. It's important to pay attention to this new regulation that is stipulating these different caps moving forward. I think most importantly and the most immediate impact is going to be with the Parent Plus loan. For instance, for those seniors that are graduating this month and or next month, and they're entering as first years for 26-27, there's going to be a new loan cap for Parent Plus loans. That cap is going to be $20,000 per dependent student applicant, or a lifetime loan limit of $65,000. I don't know how the new administration got to 65,000, because 20,000 times 4 is not 65,000, but those are the stipulations of that new regulation. Again, it's per child, so if you have multiple children, you can borrow 20,000 in a Parent Plus loan per student applicant. Whereas before you could borrow up to the cost of attendance. The other thing, again, to keep in mind is if you know that your child and or student plans on attending graduate school. Historically, there were no caps on graduate and or professional loans, but there are now new caps, annual loan caps. For instance, if you plan on attending graduate school come 26-27, I know that's not for our graduating seniors, but that loan cap will be $20,500. And there's an overall new maximum federal loan limit of $257,500 for which includes undergraduate and graduate studies. So something to keep in mind of for 26-27, but then especially in the years ahead and what your future students' plans may look like. There's also different repayment plans, new repayment structures, limited forbearances, and an impact to public service loan forgiveness. Okay, so to get into the first student loan type, I want to first preface this as to not be afraid of student loans. There are, I think the media makes student loans very scary, potentially because of the horror stories you hear. Again, I spent 10 years in loan servicing, so that was my life for a while. But I want to encourage you not to be fearful of student loans. It really is an investment into your future and or your students' future. But it's just important to be a smart borrower and or do your homework. Make sure you're researching. So federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, they come through the completion of the FAFSA. And all undergraduate students are eligible for base maximums. So as let's say an undergraduate first year, you're eligible for $5,500 for your freshman year. As sophomores, you're eligible for $6,500, and for juniors and seniors, you are eligible for $7,500. And how those base maximums are calculated or determined is based off of financial aid need or eligibility. If you are eligible for a subsidized loan, those are based off of need. There's no interest accrued while you're enrolled and for 6 months after you graduate. So the base maximum for a subsidized loan is $3,500. For a sophomore, it's $4,500, and for juniors and seniors, it's $5,500. If again, the need exists. And we'll dive further into how financial aid eligibility and or need is determined later on. And then we have the unsubsidized loans. The These are kind of like the stepchild of federal direct loans. But these are not based off of need. Interest does accrue on them as soon as they are dispersed. You might have a mixture of subsidized and unsubsidized. So let's say that you do have financial need and you have the base maximum. Let's say as a first year, you would have 3,500 in a subsidized loan. And then the other 2,000 of that 5,500 as a first year would be made up with the unsub. Or if there's no subsidized loan eligibility as a first year, that full amount that you're eligible for as a first year would be 5,500 in an unsub. The interest rate is set every July 1st, and currently for the academic year of 25-26, it is set at 6.39. There's also origination fees for the direct loan program. To originate these loans, the Department of Education charges a fee of 1.057, and that is the set fee until October 1st. And they're typically dispersed within or dispersed in 2 increments for fall and spring semester. This is essentially that same information that I just shared, but it's in a chart, easy to read. Again, eligibility for subsidized loans there in that left-hand column are based off of financial need, whereas unsub is not based on financial need. There's a difference with interest accruals. If you do have the opportunity or you're provided with a financial aid offer letter that has both subsidized and unsubsidized. Obviously, subsidized is more favorable because interest does not accrue on that loan while you're at least enrolled as a half-time enrollment status or more, or during that grace period, whereas the unsubsidized loan does accrue interest, as stated before, as soon as the loan is dispersed. You can also choose paying on that interest while you're in school, or you can choose to defer it while you're enrolled. So you have that option too. You'll be presented with entrance counseling that will review all of these terms again. A lot of times I have students that maybe they know that they want to borrow the loan, so they decide, yep, give me the full 5,500, but they worked a summer job and they saved up more money than they thought. They had an excellent high school graduation party and they came into some money, and they come on campus and they say, I actually don't need that 5,500. We can still return that loan up to 120 days from when it's dispersed. So that's something that I always remind my students and families of. There's flexibility in borrowing. You can either borrow the full amount, or maybe you don't want to borrow that amount and you get on campus and determine that you need that amount, and we can disperse it when you get on campus and realize that you need the funds. So there is flexibility with borrowing. Who can borrow these loans? Undergraduate students can borrow, only undergraduate students can borrow the subsidized loans, whereas unsubsidized loans can be undergraduate students or graduate students. There are new loan limits like we talked about. There's lower annual and total limits for subsidized loans, whereas there are higher annual and total limits for the unsubsidized loans. And we talked about interest accrual already. A quick take a drink here. Parent Plus loans. So the FAFSA is also still required if you're going to borrow the federal Parent Plus loan. Like I mentioned in that OBBA slide, there are new loan borrowing maximums for Parent Plus loans, and I just posted that there again. 20,000 a year for each student applicant, or a total of 65,000 for their undergraduate dependent child. They are unsubsidized loans. The parent is the borrower for the student. They cannot be transferred into the student's name. So if you as a parent think, I'm going to borrow for Susie, and she'll get the loan after she graduates. That's not the case. That will not happen. I can't tell you how many times that has been said when I was in loan servicing, and unfortunately, that's not how it works. If you plan as a parent to take out the Federal Parent Plus loan, it will remain in your name and not be able to be transferred. There will be a credit check. As parents, they cannot have adverse credit history, and the lender of that loan will be the U.S. Department of Education, just like the federal direct loans. How eligibility is determined, it's typically cost of attendance minus any financial aid that's given to the student, would typically be your maximum Federal Parent Plus loan eligibility. Interest rates are higher for Federal Parent Plus loans. They are currently for 25-26 set at 8.94. And again, they will be determined annually every July 1st. The origination fees on these Parent Plus loans are higher as well. They are set at 4.228%. They again are dispersed into different disbursements for fall and spring. And just like the unsubsidized loan, since the Federal Parent Plus loan is also an unsubsidized loan, repayment does begin shortly after being fully dispersed. However, you can work with your loan servicer, and there are in-school deferments while your child is enrolled, as long as, they remain full-time status or more, or half-time status or more. Lastly, there are private student loans or private loans. The student is the borrower. Oftentimes they require a cosigner. Typically that's the parent, but it doesn't always need to be the parent. They are available from banks and other private lenders other than the U.S. Department of Education. The FAFSA is not required. However, they will have different loan applications, but it's always best to exhaust the FAFSA and or the CSS profile and or state financial aid applications first before you consider private loans. Even consider outside scholarships first, of course. So private loans really should be your last option to pursue, and or maybe closing the gap, and we'll talk about that more. The interest is fixed and or variable, depends on the lender. It's dependent on the cosigner's credit score. The eligibility or loan limit is determined from the cost of attendance minus financial aid. And oftentimes I will have parents that will ask me, do you recommend a particular private lender? Or who should I go with? And unfortunately, there's a lot of higher ed institutions that can't really leverage one private lender over the other. So we suggest first and foremost to consider those financial institutions or your banks that you may be already having an established relationship with. So how is financial aid determined or financial aid eligibility determined? Every higher ed institution has a cost of attendance, and they may or may not require either just the FAFSA or just the CSS profile, or like Dickinson, we require both the FAFSA and the CSS profile if you're interested in need-based financial aid. The FAFSA was changed in 24-25. It used to calculate an expected family contribution, or what we call EFC, but it was updated to a new term called Student Aid Index, or SAI. So after completing the FAFSA and the CSS profile, either with the FAFSA, an SAI will be calculated, or the CSS profile, an EFC will be calculated. So cost of attendance minus that calculated amount from those financial aid applications equals a student's financial aid eligibility, or what is referred to as need. And it may or may not come to a shock to some families, but a lot of times what is calculated as financial aid need does not always align with what you think your need is. A lot of times there's no alignment there, and there might be some shock when you complete the FAFSA, because it may say that it expects your family to pay a larger amount than what you were anticipating. So try to take that with a grain of salt, because higher ed institutions will always verify that information. They'll check if any mistakes were made that might have inflated that SAI or EFC. But all of that information will be evaluated. Cost of attendance has different components. So you'll have direct billed charges or expenses. Those typically are tuition, fees, housing, and food, or what's considered the meal plan. You also might see a direct billed cost if you borrow the federal direct loan, because there is a direct loan fee associated with that. Typically, it's like anywhere from $50 to $60. And depending on housing choices and or meal plan choices, those can fluctuate as well. And then there's what we refer to as indirect expenses. These are items that you might not see on a bill that you get from the college or university. Instead, these are items that colleges estimate, because they're still going to be incurred expenses for the student and or the family. They fluctuate because it depends on, do you want the paper book? Do you want the online book? What are your preferences around personal expenses? How far are you traveling? So those things can fluctuate, but typically you're not receiving a bill for these items. Instead, it's a component of cost of attendance that we can then fill financial aid with. Here's some examples pulled from the College Board for the academic year 25-26 in terms of cost of attendance from various institutions. So we have a public 2-year in district commuter budget around $21,300, or if you attend a private not-for-profit 4-year on-campus institution, that was averaging around $65,470, or maybe someone's going to a public 4-year in-state on-campus institution, averaging around $30,990. It should come as no surprise, but college is expensive, as I said in the beginning, or can be expensive. And costs, like everything else, are going up. So it's something you want to keep in mind. And the ranges, as you can see, can go anywhere from 20,000 to pushing higher than 65,000. That's just an example of a chart showing that. Here's some more information on the Student Aid Index and how it is determined, or what it is. It's an index number that college financial aid staff use to determine how much financial aid need you would receive if you were to attend their school. So how is that determined? It's a formula that's based off of several different items, but typically it's looking at adjusted gross income, taxed income, untaxed income, assets, allowances against income and assets. So we deduct some value from the income and asset that is reported on the FAFSA. It's based off of family size and number in college. Actually, that's only for the CSS profile. Historically, the FAFSA did take into consideration the number in college, and it's still a question on the FAFSA, but it's no longer pulled in for need-based aid. However, some institutions have honored that if, like, let's say they're a FAFSA only school, they may still honor number in college. If it's a CSS profile and FAFSA school, they will take that still into consideration for need-based aid eligibility. The other thing that I will mention too, because again, I work with families that they ask, what is most impactful on the FAFSA? And what is most impactful a lot of times is your adjusted gross income. Untaxed income is a big one. So those would be, if you look at your W-2 and box 12 and you have a tax deferred pension, that's considered untaxed income. If you have an IRA deduction, those are typically, if you have a tax exempt reporting on your federal income taxes, again, that's untaxed income, and those can really swing need-based aid eligibility. Also, number in college for CSS profile schools. Assets can, but there's no direct value that I can tell you. There's not a 1 + 1. If you have set number of assets, it means you're not going to get need-based financial aid. I wish there was, but there's not. It's a little more complicated than that. So how to apply for financial aid? There is the FAFSA application, which is a free application for federal student aid. There's the website studentaid.gov. So you're first and foremost going to want to fill out the FAFSA. A lot of times, and most times, both parent and student will need to create an FSA ID. So I would suggest first going to studentaid.gov, creating that FSA ID, getting it out of the way, and then filing the FAFSA application. Then there's state aid applications like we talked about earlier. I included that website there. New York State has a lot of state grant opportunities such as TAP, Excelsior, New York State Dream Act, some STEM incentive programs, so definitely look there. And then for institutional aid, some schools will use the CSS profile. And they may require supplemental applications as well. Maybe your institution wants you to fill out their own financial aid application as well. I also have a lot of families that say, is it worth filling out the FAFSA? I make X number of dollars. And I always tell the families and students that I work with, it's absolutely worth exhausting all avenues, because we don't want to leave money on the table. If there's money for your student to be eligible to receive, I like to exhaust all avenues possible. So here's a chart that breaks down the differences between the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So the FAFSA is going to ask for a contributor, otherwise known as the parent, or the custodial parent, excuse me, to be invited to that FAFSA. And we get questions about who is considered a custodial parent. And historically, it was who you lived with in the 12 months prior to filing the FAFSA application. But with the 24-25 FAFSA Simplification Act, that changed to which parent financially supported the student applicant more in the 12 months prior to filing the FAFSA application. If it's a 50-50 split between mom and dad, it would then default to who has the higher income and assets would be considered the custodial parent. As we talked about before, the FAFSA is free. It can provide federal or state aid eligibility. Students who are eligible for the FAFSA are U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens or U.S. permanent residents. Both applications are available October 1st. And prior tax year information is utilized for the FAFSA. So if you're completing, for instance, the 26-27 FAFSA application, we utilized 2 years prior to 2026. We utilized, 2024 federal tax information. And then for the CSS profile, most colleges, although not all colleges or universities, will require a custodial CSS profile and a non-custodial CSS profile. For instance, Dickinson, if a family is separated and or divorced, we do require both the custodial CSS profile and a non-custodial CSS profile. If for some reason there's like a reason the non-custodial parent profile cannot be provided, there are non-custodial parent waivers out on the CSS profile to complete to explain why a non-custodial parent CSS profile would be not provided. The CSS profile does require typically a fee unless your household income is 100,000 or less. That fee is typically $25 for the first school that's listed and $16 for any additional school. It's how we determine institutional need-based aid. It has a lot more questions on it than the FAFSA application. It also treats items in your finances differently. For instance, it's going to ask about if you own a home, what is that home equity? It will ask about different asset components than maybe the FAFSA will. It'll treat if you have a business and there was a loss reported differently than the FAFSA would. So there are a lot more questions on the CSS profile, but it allows colleges and universities that utilize that financial aid application to be very good stewards of need-based aid grant funds. When you're completing the CSS profile, you're going to have to hand enter tax information, and oftentimes you'll be required to upload your tax information and your W-2 to their imaging system called iDoc. What is a financial aid package or a financial aid offer? So after you complete the FAFSA and the CSS profile and or any state application, financial aid application, colleges will notify students with what they are eligible to receive via an aid package and or aid offer. It will typically list all types of financial aid a student will receive at that specific institution, and or it may contain other financial aid type sources if they are reported to the institution, such as tuition exchange, tuition assistance, tuition benefits. Be mindful if this is your family circumstance, each institution treats tuition benefits differently. I just worked with a family recently where the mom worked at Vanderbilt, and their policy was to deduct the Dickinson Merit Scholarship from the tuition assistance before they calculated what Vanderbilt was going to pay. So something to be mindful of if we have any parents that work for employers that offer tuition benefits, and doing your research and what that policy entails. So you got your financial aid offer packages, you received your offer letters, but they look completely different or they're not seamless. And why do they look differently and not similar as all schools? Again, it depends on how that institution has their need-based aid methodology set up. It depends on if they're considering non-custodial parents or not. It depends on if they are FAFSA only schools or both FAFSA and CSS profile schools, how they're treating older siblings that may be enrolled in graduate school or not. treatment of siblings that are enrolled in undergrad enrollment, how they treat if you have younger siblings and you're paying private K through 12 expenses. How are they considering if the family has their own educational loan debt? Are they considering it or not? Are they considering cost of living? How do they treat home equity? Some institutions may count the full home equity that's available. Other institutions might only count 80%. So it all varies institution to institution. Some add back a business loss, some do not. Every institution has their own preferential packaging, or maybe they'll allow you to stack merit on top of need-based aid or grants. So it's really important when you get your financial aid offers that you look them over with a fine-tooth comb and see how you're comparing the two. So steps to take once you receive those offers. Compare all aid offers, as I mentioned before. Contact the financial aid offices if you have any questions about those aid packages and or offer letters. Be sure to mention any special circumstances that might have happened since applying for the FAFSA and or CSS profile. Maybe you applied last October when it was available, and unfortunately there was a job reduction or job loss. That's really important to notify your child's financial aid office that there's been a change since the information was reported on the FAFSA or CSS profile, so that they can take that into consideration, because that's not your current financial circumstance as it was back in October. I would highly suggest and kindly ask that you don't wait until the last minute to reach out to the financial aid office. May 1st is a lot of times where their deposit deadlines are. So if you reach out to them sooner rather than later, all the more benefit to you and to them. Make sure that you are comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. A school may have a high sticker price, but that might not be your net price. So make sure you're looking at, do they have similar cost of attendance? In the end, are they offering you similar aid package? Just make sure they're not completely different. And then plan for how you will pay for your calculated portion of what's remaining, or what that gap is after financial aid. Don't only think about the first year of their college, but think about, what does the 4 years look like once my child is enrolled in their college or university that they chose. I always try to tell families that they shouldn't make any drastic life changes, because families will ask, well, what do I need to know? And I say, try not to make any changes or drastic changes to your circumstances in the next 4 years, such as like retirement or marital status or large life circumstantial changes. However, we all know life happens, understandably so. There are things outside of our control, but that's always my tip or trick to try to tell families if it's in their control or something to plan for. So how to finance the remaining portion, what's left in your net cost. So we talked about federal direct loans, we talked about federal Parent Plus loans, private loans, but there also are tuition payment plans. So instead of paying that large or potentially large semester amount all in one lump sum, maybe you can break it up into 5-month, 4-month, 3-month payments, depending on that institution and what they offer. So be sure to ask about if they offer tuition payment plans. Excuse me. Do you have any 529s? Any UGMAs? Do you have any assets that were set aside for your child's education? Are there any tuition benefits? We even have families that will go as far as to be creative to even seek out home equity loans or home equity line of credits. Not saying that you need to do that, but that's also another avenue that we have families pursue to close that gap for financial aid. So steps to take now and moving forward. Educate yourself on the process and the possibilities. I would suggest making a spreadsheet of all possible colleges that you may be interested in or that your child is interested in, and complete their net price calculators. All colleges and universities are required to list their net price calculator on their website. So you can go to their search bar, type in net price calculator, and get an idea of what that college or university is going to cost you. And when you're completing that net price calculator, be sure that you're using the correct tax year. So if your child is entering 26-27, you're going to want to use 2024. If they're planning on entering undergrad in 27-28, you're going to want to use 2025. We always say garbage in, garbage out. So be sure that the financial data that you're entering into those net price calculators are not guesses, or if it is a guess, make sure it's like the most accurate, educated guess that you have, but have your tax and financial information in front of you when you're completing that net price calculator. Also keep in mind that not all net price calculators will pull in merit scholarships. They might only show what a need-based aid grant would look like. So keep that in mind because it varies institution to institution. Know what your financial aid application deadlines, what are needed and what the deadlines are. Apply early. Again, those applications are open as early as October 1st. So get them out of the way. And communicate any special circumstances that exist for your family. Some funny myths or things that I hear, I probably peppered these in through the presentation, but want to dispel them if possible. So I hear from incoming or prospective families, oh, we make too much money to qualify for financial aid. I'm not going to waste my time applying. And I always warn them that you might not know what's available to you until you apply for financial aid. So I always say, let's throw the spaghetti noodle against the wall and see if it sticks. Go ahead and apply and let's see if there's any aid available to your family. Or I'll have families that come up to me and they say, I make X number. Can you tell me how much financial aid I will receive? I wish it was that simple and I wish it worked like that, but it doesn't. So be patient. It does depend on each institution, and there are a lot of factors that are being asked on the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Oh, and I'll get families a lot of times that'll say, why are you basing what my child can pay for college off of my information? So again, to be equitable, we look at the whole family as a whole, parents and student income and assets. And those federal or those need-based aid calculations are based off of a calculation. It's not necessarily what the college determines that you're required to pay. Or I'll hear, I only want subsidized loans, which again, if you're offered subsidized and unsubsidized loans, that's an option for you, but that might not be the reality for everyone. So keep in mind that your financial aid package may only consist of unsubsidized loans. I don't want to borrow any loans. I only want grants and scholarships. Again, be open to borrowing student loans. Just be a smart borrower, do your homework. There will be entrance counseling if you decide to borrow the federal direct loan. And try not to wait until the last minute to explain your financial aid circumstances to the financial aid office. Or I think there are some maybe support groups out there that are saying wait till the last minute and there'll be more aid to be offered. That's not always the case, so something to keep in mind. Tips for financial aid. Research our institution's financial aid websites, attend their financial aid presentations if they're offered, complete the net price calculators like we talked about. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples, or if it is apples to oranges and they're completely different, just keep that in mind. Sticker price does not always equate to net price. And reminder, we do use prior tax year information when determining financial aid eligibility. And I think, okay, we ended with 4 minutes.
Awesome.
Emily, I think I might have to turn it back over to you. Sorry for not leaving a whole lot of time.
Thank you. Well, Noah, you covered like literally everything. I'm looking at the couple of questions that have come in, and the only thing I would say is, could you just speak for one? I do want to let people go on time, but do you want to speak for a quick second about step parents and how they can, because that's often a question in divorced families, is the expectation of step parents to contribute in some way.
Yeah, so I'm going to say our favorite saying again, it depends. That's what our default is in financial aid. So typically institutions are only basing, if they are a CSS profile school, they're only basing the need-based aid eligibility typically on 2 parents. So when I have a family where maybe mom is remarried, so there's bio dad remarried to, or bio mom remarried to a stepdad, and there's bio dad. I'll give the family the choice. Which 2 parents do you want me to consider? Do you want me to consider both biological parents to determine Susie's financial aid eligibility, or do you want me to consider mom and stepdad? But for us, we always need at least 2 parents to determine what the institutional need-based aid eligibility is, unless of course we received a non-custodial parent waiver.
Is it different for the FAFSA?
So for the FAFSA, it's only going to be the custodial parent, or if parents are married, it's going to be both parents, obviously.
There's so much to consider. And my kids, I still have a few more years. Thank you so much for your time. That are literally, you covered everything else that the families asked. So we appreciate those who tuned in and those who are watching in the future in the recorded version. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you for